Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of The Hole on the Corner. I'm Dan Peterson, aka Dr. Rocker. And in this video, we are continuing a discussion with some great guys from some other YouTube channels here that have agreed to talk with me about Lafferty. In the previous video, we did sort of some rounds between us of telling our individual stories with science fiction in general, and then our individual stories with encountering Lafferty. So in this video, we are going to jump into 5 of his short stories, his interplanetary stories, as a way of kind of building up to doing a deep dive on one particular story, a 6th story called Thieving Bear Planet. So let's introduce ourselves here. I'm Dan Peterson, doing The Hole on the Corner.
I'm Richard Rempel, and I have a channel called Vintage SF.
My name is Virgil, and my channel is Literally Books.
And I'm Chris, and I'm one half of Liminal Spaces.
Cool. So the 5 stories that we're going to look at in this video are 900 Grandmothers, Ride a Tin Can, Once on Aranea, World Abounding, and concluding with Snuffles, which is a good crescendo that is going to lead us into the next story in the next video. Okay, so we are going to start with what is possibly Lafferty's most widely known short story, 900 Grandmothers. It was spread around in a lot of different kinds of anthologies for many years. I believe even Le Guin collected it in the Norton Anthology of Science Fiction some time ago, and these sort of things. And it's just one of the better known stories. It's also the title story of his most famous short story collection, 900 Grandmothers. So I think it's the one that has made the most rounds. And then, of course, when the Vandermeers put it out in the big book of SF, it's now even more widely known. So we're going to start with that one. And it's probably, I don't know what you guys think. We'll get into this. I would say out of these 5, it's probably the most accessible, a good place to start in that way. So to give us a quick, just rough synopsis of it, Richard is gonna take it away on this one. Oh, before we start, I forgot to say, let's have a little chat about Lafferty and spoilers, because when we do the little synopses of these stories, we'll try not to spoil anything. But once we start talking about these stories, there's just no way to do them justice without just getting right into spoiler territory. That said, I have for a long time been saying I don't think Lafferty's fiction is all that spoilery or spoilerable. However, as I've kept covering things on my channel, I keep going, well, this one actually is a little bit spoilery. So there's maybe more of that than I thought about in Lafferty. And there's definitely some very particular ones here, maybe most of all Snuffles, that definitely, I don't think well, it depends. You might not want to know going in how things turn out. But I want to throw it to you guys and say, what do you think? Do you think Lafferty is spoilerable?
I think with Lafferty, really, it's a journey that is the entertainment rather than the destination. That the way he communicates and the way he tells his story is very delightful, surprising, could be perplexing to some as well. And so even if you know plot points that are coming up, to see how it is put together is really entertaining.
That's a great point. And I think it's Terry. Does anybody know how to say his name? I always say Terry Bison. I don't know if that's right. Bisson. Have you heard of him? Oh, okay. He's kind of in that 60s, 70s thing, but he must be lesser known. But he has a quote about Lafferty saying that he says something like, people say show don't tell. Well, Lafferty knows that the joy is in the telling, or something like that. And I think that's something of what Richard is getting at there, that it's like it's as much about the sheer telling of the story as anything, not necessarily these plot points and stuff. What do you guys think about the spoiler thing with Lafferty?
Well, if you would have asked me that after my first round of reading short stories for my channel, I'd say absolutely. It doesn't matter if you know. I mean, right away, when the story about the weather dancing kids, that's one of the first things you find out, is that the kids can change the weather. So there's nothing to spoil there. Like Richard said, the journey of them having their dance off, which is what I think that is the story. And that's the fun of it, is to consider these things. However, this round that you have specifically picked, I think all of them have a pivot that could be considered a spoiler, although I don't think it would hurt anybody to watch if they hadn't read every one of these stories. And I think people could still leave and enjoy the heck out of these stories. But yeah, there will be that surprise pivot that you won't get if it's spoiled. And I started expecting the pivot. So if you read these in order, I think the pivot suddenly becomes so natural that you know it's coming. But yeah, I think that, like, when I first read Snuffles, that pivot was shocking to me. I was really surprised.
Yeah. So Snuffles is one that I have actually consistently said, actually, this one is spoilerable. Any thoughts on that, Virgil?
Yeah, I think, can it be spoiled? I mean, I guess they can. I think so. These stories specifically, yes, but I don't know that it hurts them to be spoiled, because I think, like Richard already said, that like the experience is really the best part. The reveal is interesting, but it's really the journey to the reveal that is most entertaining. Maybe it's okay to be spoiled, because that might make the difference between whether you give one of these stories a try or not, or to know that, like, I don't know, this is strange. I don't know if I like this. And like, but wait, I remember that there was this thing that was supposed to happen. I'd like to see how we get there. And then, oh, okay. So that journey to how you get there is the interesting part. So, I mean, yes, spoiler, if somebody was really particular about spoilers, then maybe they'd have to be careful. But I think, honestly, they would weather spoilers pretty well.
Yeah. And off camera, Richard had also said, related to that Lafferty is the kind of writer that might seem baffling at first, and to have an idea of where you're going ahead of time might actually help your reading experience on a first go with some of these stories.
Definitely.
I will say, I guess, my concern is I don't want people to like have landed on this video and be excited and then like stop the video and like kind of never get round to reading these stories. Not least some of them are harder to find and that kind of thing. I have this feeling that if you listen through to them, they're going to kind of do their work in your mind and sit there for a while. And it may be a while before you get to the stories. And by the time you do, you may have forgotten a lot of it and be able to, still experience some of those pivots that Chris talked about. On the other hand, if you're like an uber Lafferty fan already, I'm not so worried about that. I will let you know if you really like when Lafferty occasionally has some suspense and a turn and a pivot, then just pause and go find these stories and read them and then come back and hear us discuss them. But other than that, I think, I'm not too, I think it can still be an enjoyable experience to hear us discuss them and then go read it for yourself and get your own impressions. That would be where I land on that.
Yeah, just keep watching. I think as they also mentioned, I don't think anything would be hurt by just listening. So.
Cool. All right. So Richard, let us know a little bit of what 900 Grandmothers is about.
Well, 900 Grandmothers, you have a spaceship come to, it's an asteroid, Proactus, is that the name?
Proactus, I want to say.
Thank you. And so the people coming to the asteroid, they're looking to make a profit. They're business people, venture capitalist type of people, perhaps. And they have these insanely male-like names like Manbreaker Crag, and then there's one that's not quite as over the top, and they're all looking to find ways potentially to
maybe merchandise or
there you go,
maybe exploit. Maybe is exploit the word?
So they're coming to the planet and they want to exploit the people, perhaps even, and try and merchandise something from this planet, find a way to get their riches. So the one person who is not quite in that vein of thought finds that there might be immortality on this planet, that or this asteroid, that people don't necessarily die. And this is a mystery that he wants to solve. And he starts to solve it by finding out that there are generations within a household, generations that seem to go down into the asteroid as they get older. And he's trying to understand what's going on. And these grandmothers. It's like a nesting doll of grandmothers continuing to go down into the asteroid. And he's trying to find the secret to immortality. And I think that's where I would leave it.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. That's so good. I need to practice doing synopses more. I would have probably read the first line where he says, like, he was always wondering, how did it all begin? And I would have like jumped right over the venture capitalist stuff and been like, so eventually the indigenous people there are like, they have their grandparents in their house and then they say there's more grandparents. And I would have jumped straight to that. But the way you did it, you see what a Lafferty story is like. It's like it starts with this kind of science fiction trope, and it's got a particular angle with this trying to merchandise this asteroid and so on. But then there's something about immortality. Is there a secret? And then the way you went and they go down into the asteroid, and that's true. That's like how it works. Their dwellings go down and down into the land itself and stuff. And that gave the feel of like, yes, this is what it's like to experience a Lafferty story. You got, not always, sometimes he will throw you in the deep end from the start, but often he will like go like, okay, you like science fiction? Here's a science fiction trope, and then like, now it's a little weirder, isn't it? No, it's really weird, isn't it? And we haven't even got to the weirdest part of this story yet, or to me, the most sort of wondrous and strange part of it. So yeah,
the stuff before the turn always has a tendency to be more. Virgil, you the word man?
I guess. Sorry.
The only word I could think of is normal.
Conventional.
Thank you. That's the word right there. Yeah, the stuff before the turn has a tendency to be more conventional, and then right after the turn, that's where kind of the meat of the philosophy is. But I think that without the conventional stuff before it, the stories would lack. I think that he lulls you into this sense of I'm reading a very normal science fiction story here, and it's unique and it's a little bit weird take, and then blam, he sideswipes you with this just strangeness that really, really makes these fun.
I'm going to make a quick aside about that as a note on sort of a little guide to Lafferty reading. I want to point out that is what drew me to Lafferty initially, when I kept running into these individual stories and I was like, oh, here comes the turn, I was waiting for it. And when stories didn't seem to do that, as often as not, I really tossed them aside. I was like, oh, well, that was a dud. On we go. And that's a real mistake with Lafferty. There are some that are, by Lafferty standards, pretty conventional or uneventful or just not super literary or super like wondrous or strange. Okay, there are some like that. But when one seems like that, make sure to give it another go, because many of them that may seem that way on later reads are like, whoa, this is written in a really lovely way. These sentences are amazing. And the gentle, quieter thing that he's doing here has its own kind of wonder to it, and or there's other kinds of stories too that just seem a little chunky and chewy, and you're kind of like, what's going on here? But those often repay rereads, and so many of those kinds of stories that didn't do the what I'd come to expect with this turn and all that kind of thing have now become some right up there, my all-time favorite stories. So just be aware of that kind of thing with Lafferty, I would say.
I think the Monkeys with the Typewriters is one that starts without a turn, that starts just right into it, and that is so worth it. It really is, because I mean, he's just right away is like, here's an angel that has to do this because he got in trouble. And then the whole story is just that. So yeah, I do agree that Lafferty he's not Shyamalan. He doesn't need to always have the twist. But the stories you picked are going to give that illusion as we read through them that it's always a twist. Yeah,
and I really didn't mean to do that. That's why this whole spoilers thing came up too. I was like, oops, I've kind of picked all stories that do this. But it's fun to go on a run like that. Another thing I really think I'm hearing you guys say, the more we talk about this set of stories and just ongoing exposure to Lafferty, and that I'm really enjoying rediscovering, is though there's just such an incredible recurring amount of themes and patterns to his stories, there's a lot of variety. And I really think there's a sense in which Lafferty is kind of restless as an artist, and he keeps wanting to do new stuff. And you guys, trust me, you haven't even got anywhere near to his weirdest fiction yet. There's stranger stuff out there. He's going to do all kinds of things. He's just going to keep you guessing, like, what are we doing? There's like tiny people under a table. at a conference having their own conference under the table, you know, I'm just it just never ends, you know, and it is that expectation though that also makes you a little underwhelmed with some of the stories as well, which are often as good as those. They just didn't do that wow thing like that. But anyway, yeah, there's variety there, so we're experiencing that. So 900 grandmothers.
Before we move on from this idea, I just wanted to, I know we've already covered it slightly, but I'm going to pull up my notes here. The concept of masculinity through naming was really incredible to me, that at a certain point, every one of these astronauts chose their name. It reminds me of like rock stars, right? That I don't know what David Bowie's name was before, but he chose David Bowie to sound cooler. And these guys are specifically doing that. And I like that a lot of these stories, and this, I lost this as I went on, but a lot of these stories deal with the cult of astronauts as like badass explorers. And I think that was really cool. And I love that this one person, does anybody remember this main character's name?
Kieran, or Kieran. I've heard people say Kieran Swicegood.
Yeah, Kieran doesn't choose to take on this name, but my favorite is George Blood. Why I wrote George Blood's name and not the main character's name. George Blood does choose, and he has all this hair on his chest, and there's a line that literally says, "But it's a graft job." So they're like going through surgery to be manlier with these names, and I think this concept of bravado that he puts forward is incredible. And I think that when we get to Snuffles, I got to remember to talk about a moment about the sexes there, but I really love how he looks at these concepts of, and you get it in the Tall Tales too, the concepts of these ultra masculine astronaut men. And when I read science fiction, I'm always afraid that I'm going to get to the didn't age well sexist part. And I didn't feel that a lot with Lafferty. I really didn't. I thought that he was really kind of cutting edge for his time. I mean, just almost making fun of the bravado of these astronauts with their graft jobs of hairy chests. I thought it was incredible.
Did you guys find that, Virgil and Richard, like a critique of hypermasculinity in a funny way?
Definitely. Yeah, especially since I think at some point in that story, the main character, it says that if he had chose a manly name, this never would have happened to him, without revealing what happens, and that he sort of regretted it, and they sort of berate him for not doing, like, why didn't you choose a name? Don't you want to be manly like us? What's wrong with you? You know, you know. And I did love that, and it's almost as though is that the experience that he has couldn't have happened if he had been hyper masculine. It just would never. He would have no access to it. So I don't know. I really liked that thought, or that experiment that he's sort of that idea that is sort of presented in the story.
His accessibility to the grandmothers, I don't think would have happened if he was Manbreaker Crag. He needed to be Swicegood to be able to do something like that. And even that name, Lafferty with names. There's no Heaven or Judy or something like that as a name. They're just all these crazy names.
Seriously,
man. I'm sorry. I will try not to do this too much, but I just have to say, with the names also, you ain't seen nothing yet. The names he comes up with later on and in novels and later stories, it's just, I wish I could think of some. The only one that's coming to my mind is Professor Rosemary Thumbs Down. And,
I love that.
But like, it gets weirder than that. But
Manbreaker Crag. I mean, speaking of He-Man cartoons, I could watch a Manbreaker Crag cartoon for real.
Yes, but you know what? Let me read out these names real quick if I can. There's Manbreaker Crag, Heave Huckle, Blastberg, George Blood, Move Mannion, and then in parentheses it says, when Move says move, you move. Trouble Trent, and these sorts of things. It's just like,
it's incredible.
Comedy. It really is. It's so funny. It's hilarious.
I like he juxtaposes the beginning with these manly astronauts with these matriarchal grandmothers. So the whole story is this kind of almost clash with this one not manly guy able to bridge them. It was really interesting.
Yeah. Jeff Vandermeer in his intro to the story in that big book of SF says this is a feminist story, it's a feminist SF story. I forgot there's a couple more names in here that are almost even better because he's saying this is stuff you should have chosen, like Storm Shannon, Gut Boy Barrelhouse, Slash Slagle, and Neville Knife. But yeah, Gut Boy Barrelhouse and Manbreaker Crag. I want to see a show with guys teaming up.
Gut Boy Barrelhouse has to be Manbreaker Crag's sidekick.
Yeah.
I feel like these guys could run a barbecue joint in Texas or something.
Right.
That's name you Gut Boy. You have a lot to live up to.
That's a great observation of the not juxtaposing, what's that, the counterbalancing or whatever of the matriarchs and these hypermasculine astronauts.
This is one I'm not sure if we should spoil. I have a couple observations about how it finishes, but I would hope that people seek this one. If there's one story to seek out, perhaps in the stories we're talking about, this one, or maybe Snuffles would be the ones I'd recommend.
Yeah.
Right. Well, let's do this then. Let's when we get to the point that you feel it's going to spoil, let's say if you skip over this if you don't want this to be spoiled, because I would kind of like to talk about that bit if that's okay.
Okay.
Can you tell me what his first novel? No, not his first novel. What was the novel that he wrote that was nonfiction about a Native American?
That is called Oklahanali.
Yes. This is the story more than any of the others that I felt that kind of Native American influence in. And you just held up a cover. I don't know if you meant to, but you're holding the book in your hand and you held it up. And even that picture has a kind of a call to that, I think, that style.
Yes. 100%. Yeah, you've definitely nailed it. There's definitely oh man, we could go so far into this and we probably shouldn't here, but I've been reading recently some Native American philosophy, like contemporary philosophers talking about philosophy from a Native American perspective. And one of the things they talk about in making in having a philosophy that is true to Native Americans and not just like, well, here's what all the Europeans have been saying for hundreds of years, and here's how we fit in and bounce off that. But like, no, we're starting from ourselves, right? One of the things they talk about is the issue of asking questions, which is what philosophy is all about. And then it's not totally straightforward for them. And it depends on who's asking, when they're asking, who they're asking, at what time, and all these kinds of things. And a lot of that has to do with asking elders and sages. And a lot of it has to do with whether you're asking inside or outside of ritual and things. And that's exactly what's going on in this story. Like, when we get to this part, there's going to be this question about, like, we haven't gone through ritual yet. We can't give you this story or this answer that you're looking for. I don't know if you remember that it talks about ritual. They keep going, is it ritual? No, it's not ritual yet. So that really, ties into the way Native Americans think and stuff. And for whatever reason, I'm not saying Lafferty was perfect in his representation of Native Americans. I really need to see a Native American readership of Lafferty kind of encounter that. But for whatever reason, he felt this simpatico with them and seems to have understood a fair bit of it, not in a total insider way, but definitely at a level of sympathy. Like, I kind of think the way you guys think, as this Irish Catholic guy or something. I don't know,
As much as a Catholic guy can.
Yeah, I mean, that's complicated too, because obviously there's a history between Catholicism and Native Americans, Christianity and Native Americans, and natives have very diverse views on that. Let me just say, it's not like straightforward there either. Anyway,
I think that's what gives him a bit of a Southwest flavor. That's why I think the Southwest claims him. Yes, is because of that. This felt like the most Southwest of the stories that I read this time, which is strange because it's on an asteroid in space.
Yeah. Well, and I'm so glad you see that, because I've been saying for a while that he has all these Southwestern stories. I call them bioregional stories, in the actual Southwest. And then I always say he takes the Southwest to the stars, either in little touches or like just a whole story kind of really feels like that, like this one. So yeah, I'm glad you see that.
Yeah.
What is a special aspects man? What is Kieran's job?
Special aspects. I don't know.
That's what it calls him. Like the rest of them are literally there to, as venture capitalists to figure out like profit stuff, but that's not his goal.
They connected it to culture somehow.
Yeah.
Like he's there to appease people that want these cultures to be slightly respected, is what I kind of got out of it, is that he has to write about this from the angle of it almost, that's about all I'll say. But
like almost like the social guy, who, kind of to maybe to smooth over the operation a little bit, or maybe just maybe some sort of social science sort of studying type thing. But then you kind of see him, it seems like he kind of struggles with, and he sort of like casts aside his his career's morals, and is like, I'm just going to do this thing because I want to know. It just he sort of like pushes that aside. Yeah, it's very interesting.
It seemed like he was kind of an anthropologist, and the question of what he was doing at the end was, should an anthropologist give away his just being a viewer or becoming involved?
Yeah, thank you for expressing what I couldn't say.
Well, Manbreaker at one point says something along the lines of, we want to cut like a rump roast or something out of this hog, of this asteroid. And if we can find a cultural twist in its tail, then all the better, or something along those lines. And it's really sinister. It's really like, a lot of corporations really do that. Like, how can we make a shit ton of money at the expense of other people, but make it look like we really respect them and or this land or whatever it may be. And I think speaking of, Lafferty's critique of hypermasculinity and matriarchy versus patriarchy, I mean, he's got a lot going on here. He's critiquing like capitalism and stuff, it seems to me. I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's not too far to look at colonialism in terms of what he's talking about here. And so that's where I see that Southwest flavor that you were talking about. It's pretty blatant, and it's pretty cutting in terms of the way it's presenting it in a humorous fashion.
Absolutely. So on this note, I don't know if you guys have run into this about Lafferty yet, but he has a reputation as being a conservative of some sort. And he self-identified as that, although he was very quick to qualify, like, I don't fit whatever you're thinking of in regards to conservative or liberal. I am both liberal and conservative and everything. But he was definitely some sort of conservative on various levels. And I don't want to get overly into that aspect just now. I just want to say, look at the things we're talking about politically here in this story, and yet he's considered a conservative. And it's no problem to me, whatever your guys' political allegiances are, that, and you can say or not say that, but I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts on how his conservatism goes with these critiques of hypermasculinity and capitalism and so on?
I'd never even heard that. I'm kind of shocked. He seemed very liberal to me in all of his stories.
That's a good impression to know.
The only connection I would have had is just because in looking up Lafferty, it says that he was devout Catholic. And that normally would lean, well, not necessarily being Catholic myself. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're very conservative, but historically it would mean if you're religious, you tend to be more conservative. But yeah, the tone of the stories certainly don't fit the mold of what I would think of if somebody had told me that. I think maybe he's even an outsider in that regard, even in his, he doesn't, I feel like it was very much a characteristic of him as a person, is that he rejected anything offhand, just sort of like, oh, I must fall in line with this. He's like, no, I don't like this thing, and this thing is gone. We're not going to keep it. And I think he does that. Well, he did it in his writing, and I think he did it in his life too. That's my idea.
Yeah, he definitely comes across as an independent thinker. Go ahead, Richard.
I was just going to say, not so much political, but I just see him as a very culturally sensitive person in terms of, and we were talking about how it didn't seem like he fell into the trap so many people did in the in the early 50s, 60s, and 70s science fiction of seeing really outdated in terms of their cultural references. And we're going to get to his other alien planets as well. But I also find it interesting that he sees aliens as truly alien. We have sort of a conventional look at an alien, and then we have that pivot point that Chris talked about, and we say, oh, they are alien.
Yeah, good. Well, I mean, I kind of wish that, in some ways, I wish I hadn't brought that up. But on the other hand, it's actually really good to know you guys. That's the impression that he gave you, and I think it generally is with people. And I think when people eventually, get really into him and realize there's some kind of conservative element there, he's beloved of, Neil Gaiman and, Zelazny and Ellison and, I don't know who all else, Jeff Vandermeer, and, I think when they have discovered this, they're just kind of like me, they're just kind of like, well, that's a puzzle, like, this is interesting. Let's keep working that out. And the best I can come up with right now is, and has been for a while, is I really think he has a bit of a wrestling match going on inside him between a liberal progressive sort of bent and a conservative bent. And I'm not sure why, he feels that pull or what's going on there. There's a lot more, sort of research to be done there. And in that sense, I actually find him an extremely interesting writer. You know what I mean? An interesting person and thinker of like, why do you have this pull going on inside you between these poles, But generally speaking, I think all of us like him.
I think we get too stuck.
Like him so much because of that liberal impulse that seems to come across in it. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we get stuck too much in terms of this binary liberal conservative.
Yes.
There's people and there's lots of gradations within there. And he definitely is a person expressing many emotions, many opinions. And I could see him being a conservative and still being very sensitive culturally.
Yeah, cool.
I think he's small town conservative or small town liberal, which a lot of small town liberals still call themselves conservative. But also I think that he came from a time that exactly what you were just saying, Richard, when it was that binary didn't exist. I feel like that binary is new even to me growing up. I didn't sense that binary as a kid as much, and maybe it was because I was a kid, but I don't see like I think that there was a time when people could more easily disagree and talk with each other and have really unique conversations that their politics didn't color everything that they thought. This could go on for hours, but yeah, I agree, Richard. Well said.
Very well said.
Yeah, there's a lot more we could say about that. So let's not do that. But I'll bounce from that and pull us back into science fiction proper in this story by saying that another funny thing about Lafferty is that he kind of hated John W. Campbell and his stable of writers, and for various reasons. But I believe he even used the word conservative in a negative sense about them as science fiction writers. And
I can see that.
Yeah, and so he is like just blasting out against that, like, old school, let's go conquer the stars, type of science fiction. So.
Was he? Did Campbell publish any of his work? I want to say, was that?
So I went through today to find all of these back here. I went through every short story and clicked where it was first. Not one was in analog. Okay. Not one Lafferty story was in analog.
Yeah. No.
Okay. I think I remember seeing it.
Frederick Pohl was one of the first and biggest editors to really start taking in his stuff. So he was in a lot of Galaxy and If.
Yep.
And so some of the other early or proto New Wave people. Asimov's magazine starts taking up a lot in the late 70s and 80s, actually.
Yeah. A lot of them in the 80s. And unfortunately, I do have a stack of those, but I didn't have any of the Lafferty issues.
I think, and that's the thing too, is Lafferty, was he had complex views. So he seems to, I don't know exactly what he thought of Asimov or his fiction, but he quotes from him from time to time and stuff, just to use something he said in his work or something, and doesn't have any ill will there. And Asimov collected him sometimes and seems to have liked him. So yeah.
Hmm.
So okay, let's move on from this story, but let's finish it by going into a bit of a spoilery bit here. So if you want to skip ahead and not know how this story turns out and what Kieran finds as he meets more and more of these grandparents and goes down into the tunnels or whatever under their houses, then skip forward. So when he does, you know what? Let me back up. Actually, there's something we can talk about without spoilers. Richard, you mentioned the alien thing. What do you guys think of these people, the Proavatoi, as aliens? Did you get a sense of alienness from them?
Yes, but not what we would normally say when somebody says, "Oh, that there's aliens in this story." It's not what you would not picture this, but they're more alien than most people write aliens in science fiction. But it's not like antagonistically alien.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a foe to defeat or encounter or in battle. They're sort of just blithely, well, this is how we exist. This is how we live. To me, it's a really interesting look at another culture that's so different from the colonizing type culture, or the invading culture, or whatever, that it's almost like they can't understand why you like this. Why can't you just do this thing that we want you to do? Why can't you just don't want to make money?
Yes.
They're just like, why? I just love it's, and he does it without ever saying anything like that. That's what I think is so wonderful.
That is a good point. There's an alienness there just in the sheer social sort of difference. So what do you guys think, Richard and Chris?
I think these are the most human aliens of the stories that we have. I kept picturing a human person, not some sort of alien bear or flying squirrel or something.
Yeah. Chris?
All I could see was the storyteller dolls that you can buy all over the touristy traps out here. I'm sure you guys have seen them before, but there's a grandma and all kinds of little teeny people all over the grandma doll. And that's what I saw. Just small. I mean, at times it seemed like little pottery pieces that he was holding in his hands, but I couldn't separate what I felt like was the Native American aspect of this in my brain. Just like the illustrator of that cover, I saw them very specifically like that. And I think that directly textually from the book, they have faces that seem like masks. That they don't have, and they almost seem like cloth faces. They describe them literally as kind of cloth faces, but they become more normal faces as they get older. So the grandmas seem to be more human than the younger people that they first meet when they land on the asteroid.
Yeah.
So,
which
kind of alien?
Yeah, and I noticed that way more on this most recent read. That whole I remembered that their faces looked like masks, which is a little signal of something, physically alien there. And I had forgotten how he says, but they gain character the older and older they get, and they seem more, like developed people or something like that. There's one other physical description in there that he just barely drops in. And I think it's fun the way he does that, because you can take time and stop, and he won't do it for you, but you can take time and stop and think, what would that look like? But he talks about their hands. And he says, I believe he says he doesn't say how many, but it's as if they have more than 5 fingers. He calls them digits, and that they move in a way that is not like ours. And
he straight up says their hands could be their faces.
Oh, he does say that.
Which I thought, I forgot about that until you brought that up. And that's incredible.
Yeah. So he leaves a little mystery there of what are we talking about here? So there's a little touch of what we kind of think of physically as alien in these people. But I agree with everyone that you mostly picture something humanoid.
I have 2 little things I wanted to say. One is that all that sort of, the farther back they go, the more human they are, just sort of reminds me of the Left Hand of Darkness from Le Guin, how that whole culture of people used to be human, but they've evolved so far that they're not, they have I don't know, in that story, I think they have 9 different sexes that they change throughout or something. Anyways, not to spoil that doesn't spoil that story. And then the other thing, the whole time I read this story, the thing I kept thinking about was the Ray Bradbury story, I don't remember the title, but it's in Mexico, and it's about like the Day of the Dead, and they take this tour through this to the mummies that they keep for the Day of the Dead, and they go back, and this man and his wife get caught in this town, and they're going through there, and it just very much felt like that. But what I loved is that story is very sinister, and this story is, though it has a similar arc, is very funny, and it's funny all the way up into the last second. It's funny, and I don't know, I just loved it. Sorry, I don't know if that fits right there, but I just couldn't resist.
No, that's good. Yeah, I was noticing on this read as well that when it starts talking about ritual, because it says that pretty early on. Nowadays, maybe in the past too, when I read that, and when we read that, when people see that, I think you would start to get a sinister feel, like, what's this ritual? In fact, I haven't finished this book, but Downward to Earth by Silverberg.
Silverberg, yep.
Yeah, I'm only don't spoil that one for me. But
I love that book. I'm going to do a review on it soon.
I know there's going to be something about a ritual, and I have a feeling it's going to be something intense, and I think I got that from Book Build as well. And so it does go back. That was written around this time. Yeah, that's often where we would go when we hear that, but that's not what Lafferty's doing here at all. And oftentimes that is a way of kind of othering, indigenous peoples and stuff, even in our science fiction. Like, oh, if there's going to be a ritual, it's going to be scary and bloody or something. Like. Whereas here, it's a rite of passage into understanding deeper wisdom from the ancestors. So, lastly, then on this story, and then you could say anything else you want to add about it.
Oh, I was just going to really quick say that the Bradbury story is called El Dia de Muerte, which just means the Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Actually, I was going to say about Bradbury too. I totally forgot to mention in my SF origin story that Bradbury was super important for me early on. It was really just one story. I love the Martian Chronicles, but I encountered them later. But it was one story from the Martian Chronicles where a family is swimming and basically becomes Martians. I don't know if you remember. That's buried deep within the Martian Chronicles. And I read it in a school book. I read it in a school book, and it wasn't even assigned. It was just one of the ones in there. And it made me feel so weird and strange. I was like, third, fourth, fifth grade.
I think that's the last one in the book where they look in the puddle and they're the Martians, right?
Yeah.
That's the best part. That's the whole crux of the novel.
That has informed something of my sense of alien ever since. And I know it's weird because it's humans transformed into aliens, but I'd never encountered anything like that in my life. And it left such a mark on me. And I definitely get feelings of alien from Lafferty, but I have to say I think he's still doing it in a somewhat different way than that, although it's adjacent. So I'm just putting that there as a note. That's something to be explored.
And I always find it interesting that we talk about aliens, but they're on their home worlds. We're the aliens coming to their world.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of that reflection. Who is really truly alien, or what does it mean?
It's like you said. It's like you said earlier. I don't hear a Canadian accent.
Okay, hands up. I othered his Canadianness. I was like, "Oh, I hear you, Canadian." My bad.
Proudly Canadian, eh?
There's. I was going to say something about a Canadian stereotype of you being polite, and I remembered you should go check out the story by Lafferty. It's not one of his crazier ones, but it's really fun. It's called "The Polite People of Pudabundia." Maybe he was riffing on Canadians. I don't know. No, not really though. But they have to wear all these different colors of glasses for different social things. It's really funny and cool. Anyway, but the moment of real wonder, I was enjoying the story the very first time I read it, and it's like, oh, this is really interesting. But the moment of wonder that locked it in for me as one of the best or better Lafferty stories was when he started encountering smaller and smaller grandmothers. I did not see that coming. And I was just like, and it was not the kind of turn I was used to from Lafferty at that point when I read it. It would usually be even stranger or maybe violent or just different than that. It was like, really like suddenly being in a fairy tale or something. And it was magical and special. And, I was just like, whoa, I'm feeling weird. This is like not where I expected things to go. And of course, it's tied into also him being angry and demanding things of them and everything. But that smaller and smaller chilies, like literally, it says that like the size. Imagine a little grandmother the size of a bee on the tip of your finger, laughing at you in a tiny voice, going, "Oh, it's too funny. We can't tell you how it all began. You have to go through ritual. You have to get older." I just love that, and that's what pushes it up there into like what a wonder tale this is. For me. Well, I wonder what you guys think.
Well, I also like the part
Definitely.
where the person seeking this story of what's immortal life to these people just gets more frustrated and angry as these little tiny grandmothers get more joyful and hilarious, and he just can't handle it.
Yeah, it's awesome. This was, I mean, I enjoyed all the stories, but this one was just the easiest to appreciate and enjoy immediately. It was just such a, it's like the protagonist does not win, but it's such a wonderful defeat. I don't know. I just enjoyed it so much. I don't know.
That's really cool. A wonderful defeat. That's amazing.
And I empathized with him. I get why. I mean, yes, I would like this information. To have the concept that you could find that knowledge, I would probably be that guy. I have to admit it.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, I almost every time I read it, when it gets right down to those last couple of times, he's going, "Please, God damn it, just tell me." I feel it every time. I'm like, oh, and now on subsequent reads, I know he's not gonna find out. And then I think that last paragraph is super dark when it says he became Blaze Bolt and went and ruled a Sweet Sea Island in Sector M, whatever. Like he took on the Manbaker Crag thing and maybe even upped it. He didn't go like find profit. He just went out and ruled he found some other natives like, "You guys are under my thumb now because I'm a badass. I'm a gut boy barrel house. I'm Blaze Bolt."
He's a good boy.
He was just shattered, and he just went the route that everybody else had gone and took it up a notch.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. You can see it just breaks him. The experience, he wasn't prepared for, it's almost, what would you say? Like it's almost Lovecraftian in that sense. It's like you can't handle this information, and it literally mentally destroys him. And but it was all pleasant. It's all through laughing and you're so silly. You're not ready for ritual. And it was such a great turn.
Yeah, it's like Lovecraftian laughter or a laughing Lovecraftian or something. I'm so pleased to hear you say that. I've brought this up a lot about Lafferty. I really see a similar sort of structure for a lot of his stories, that by the end, there's this monstrous revelation that is too much to take in, and insanity is threatening. And then the differences I see are like the road to get there, and also that there's different options for Lafferty's characters sometimes, to where what I say is that you can laugh along sort of with the joke, the cosmic joke, if you like, rather than just going, it's all indifferent and we don't matter at all. It's like, like the Lovecraftian sort of view. And that's fine if that's people's view or whatever. But I just think there's other options, and Lafferty kind of shows a slightly different way to approach similar material. I don't know what you guys think.
I agree. Very much.
Well, speaking of dark things in relation to all that, let's go to Ride a Tin Can. Okay, so I have to try to intro this one. Ride a Tin Can is another astronaut space exploration. Actually, in this case, I don't know how long they've been involved with this planet before now, but a couple of anthropologists come to people in particular to basically study these people, these indigenous people here called the Shelney. But this one, okay, I don't know what you guys think. I'll say this as part of the synopsis, and then you can bounce off of it. But it is tonally different than all the rest of these. It's really not funny, and it is elegiac in tone, and also it's written in first person, which is pretty rare for Lafferty. He only does that a handful of times, and you feel it from the opening lines. Let me see if I can find them real quick.
The heck does elegiac mean?
Oh, like an elegy, like sad, like
elegiac.
Sorrow.
Got it. Sorry.
I always pronounce things wrong.
That's okay. I'm sorry.
By the way, my copy of Strange Doing has a few illustrations from Jack Gone, or I don't know how you say his name. He's famous, but this is Right a Tin Can.
I love that.
That is wild.
Yeah. This is how it starts. These are my notes on the very sticky business. They are not in the form of a protest, which would be useless. And on it goes, but it's like this right from the get-go is just like, you can just tell, like, there's something to be protested here, but there's no point, and then like that strikes the note of the whole, how the story starts. And so they study these people, and Holly, his partner in doing this, is likened to them and sympathizes with them to a degree that she can understand their language and so on. But basically what happens is, again, venture capitalists and so on are there. And this one I'm just going to spoil in the synopsis, because within pages, I think, I don't know what you guys think, it's pretty clear what's happening here, and that they are exploiting these people to the point of using them as a food source, because there's this question of whether they're even rational creatures or just animals that have something that looks like talk or something like that. And so that's what the story is about. I told you I'm not great at synopses. Does anybody else want to add to that in terms of what it's about?
I think I don't know if everybody read this one, but I think this is the most heavy-handed of all of them.
Okay.
When you said tone difference, and I loved it. First off, I love that Hawley seemed like a folktale collector. And that really, I love the concept of collecting folktales. And I loved, you and I talked a little bit about before we were on camera about the fact that this story includes small folktales. And in fact, I feel like all the emotional weight of this story comes down to a folktale of them, almost a sing-song folktale of them being collected by these men that show up in music machines, and they all very happily jump onto this music machine, but they're slowly realizing that inside the music machine, their bones are going to be removed, and they're going to be put in tin cans. Which gets us to the title of the story, Write a Tin Can. This one, you're absolutely right, did not leave me laughing in any way, shape, or form. I was just in shock. And then Holly, who is presented as being ugly and being short and being able to take on the aspects of the things she studies. They call these aliens goblins. And you're right, they try to decide if they are even intelligent, because of course they're eating them. You don't want to ask, is your food intelligent?
Right.
And Holly becomes one of these things and chooses to get onto the music wagon with these aliens. So some of those cans are going to be human meat, which is really wild. Yeah, this one, I think he is making his statement loud and bold, and this is anti-capitalist. I could see vegans grabbing onto this story. Yeah, what a statement in this one. For me, this is one of the best anti-colonialist stories I've ever seen in science fiction. Richard, do you want to make a salvo on this? Did you get to read this one?
I did, and honestly, I don't quite remember it as much, but I do remember how disturbing it is, and the efforts of someone to understand the culture and sacrificing, I'm not sure if sacrifice is the right word, experiencing the same outcome. It's just a very disturbing story.
Yeah. I will say this about the fact that they called them goblins. Okay, Virgil, on one of his book hauls recently, had gotten hold of The Reefs of Earth, a novel by Lafferty, which is one of my all-time favorites. And there's two families in it that are central characters. They're called the Dulantes. The adults are siblings and the children are cousins. And so they go by this Irish name, but they are from the planet Puka, and they are called Pukas. And that is an Irish Gaelic term for goblin. and they're so clearly, in a good way, they're so clearly an alien stand-in for the Irish, of which Lafferty was, and they like team up with Native Americans and stuff in the story. It's great. It's amazing. But they're, persecuted by the small towns people and different things like that. So it's very significant that he's making these people who are being genocided here goblins. And I don't think he's trying to say, I think it's a very universal idea about indigenousness and colonialism and stuff that he's putting forth in this story, but he is including himself in that because historically the Irish have suffered under colonialism, and that's very alive to Lafferty, and was even a little bit part of his experience growing up, from what I hear from Andrew, his biographer, that like there weren't many Irish or Roman Catholics at all in his particular little area of Tulsa where he grew up. And when they had to walk to their Catholic school, as he understood them, Protestant kids, but certainly non-Catholics, literally threw rocks at them, and like hurt them. Like, it was painful, as they tried to go to school and stuff. And that's, compared to what a lot of people go through, that's a pretty minor persecution. But he had a sense of like, whoa, some people don't like other people just for being the kind of people they are, So I just want to mention that. I think that's, folded in here a little bit too. And it's maybe part of why he just seems to really take up the cause of, the colonized in all of his fiction. He's just like, well, there's, speaking of sides, sometimes there is a time to take a side, and in his case, he's like, well, I'm on the side of the colonized over against, the oppressors, for what it's worth. Any thoughts on that?
I didn't get to read this one. I didn't do my homework, so I'll get my grade deducted a little. But but it just sounds, again, you're saying it's not humorous, and it just makes me think like, yeah, that meant something. It sounds like this was it was more than just a story to write, especially since he's choosing to use a form of narrative, a first person narrative that he doesn't normally adopt, and to take a serious tone, which everything I've read of him always has a little playfulness in it. It doesn't sound like this has much, other than just sort of the play that the title is giving, to ride a tin can, obviously. It seems like it was a pretty important sort of a statement that he was making. It was something that he felt pretty strongly about, not just sort of a win points type like, oh, this is, if I do this, who's going to argue with this. It really felt like, it feels to me as though that story was him saying something very important.
Yeah.
I think some of this type of literature from him is why people who use the terminology new wave wanted to adopt them into that as well. Well, Ellison's version of it for United States, and Moorcock, I'm not sure what he thought of him. If you have something on that, I'd be very interested. But Lafferty was kind of somebody that people wanted to include in who they were or their type of collections that they were making for a number of reasons. And I actually find it very interesting that people think of him perhaps as a new wave writer. I have difficulty seeing that, but I can see how there's a counterculturalism that he has. That's a very appealing one to people.
Yeah, that's a good nuance about him and the new wave. I agree with that.
Moorcock published him in quite a few of New Worlds.
Are you sure?
I am.
I'm going to have to go research that, because my understanding was that he was never in New Worlds.
I think now you got me confused, but I feel like
I'm more than happy and willing to believe that, but I'm going to have to double check on that.
I feel like I saw the quarterly New Worlds. Wow. Let me look at that for a second. You guys continue on.
I will say that, so this is the only other main thing I want to say about this story is the stories within the stories. I want to say something about those, that they record, the anthropologists record them telling these folk tales or these traditional tales, which is literally what happened in the United States. That, people took down the Pawnee tales and different things. And that's a very complicated history that natives are still kind of working out. It has its pluses and minuses, but yeah, they record these folk tales that they say, and Lafferty has so many books with stories within stories and little micro stories that last like a paragraph or a page that work all by themselves. And these are some of the very best I've ever encountered in his work. And they do those and some other aspects of this, like the gallows. There is like a gallows humor to it, but it's almost without humor. I mean, it's formally gallows humor. Like they're excited they're going to go get their bones taken out of their bodies and get in the cans or whatever, because I don't know why exactly. But these stories have his exuberance and the exuberance that he gets from having listened to many indigenous tales, both in America and when he was in the South Pacific in World War II from people from those islands. And that exuberance comes through in these stories. So that is there, and there's like a beauty to them. But they are painful, literally sometimes about pain. Like there's a story where there's actually like three different, if you pay close attention, there's sort of three different species, intelligent species on this planet. The Shelney, what are the other ones called? Skokie, and ones they just call the frogs. And this Skokie hears a Shelney playing his jug flute and says, "That's the voice of my wife. What have you done with her?" And he's like, I'm just playing my jug flute. And then he's like, "I think she's inside you." He's like, "Oh, I didn't mean to swallow her. I'm so sorry." And he's like, "Well, let me take you apart and find her." So he takes him apart and he can't find her. And he's like, "I could have sworn she was in there." He's like, "Well, that's okay. Will you just put me back together?" And then Frog comes over to help him put back together. And they put them all back together. And he's like, "I have some extra pieces here. I couldn't fit back together. Sorry about that." And it says that he's put back together wrong and he's in great pain. And then the Skokie goes, "Where's Frog, by the way?" And it says, "I'm in here," said Frog from inside the Shelney that it was put back together wrong, which you can feel like, the humor and the exuberance and the strangeness, but also, ouch, it hurts. And it says that he like wanders around, like not having, just being in pain and not being put together right, and I don't even know how exactly that fits in with the whole story and stuff, but like, and there's like 3 or 4 of these tales, all equally beautiful and dark and with elements of even the funny in them. So that's an amazing aspect of this story as well.
I think it's a sense of trauma that he brings across for those stories.
Good. Yeah. Are we ready to move on then? All right.